At 9:17 a.m., they fired me in a glass conference room with a view of the river. Not because I was bad at my job, because I was too good at it. The kind of good that makes weak leaders feel exposed. They didn't say that part, of course. They never do. They slid a folder across the table, like it was a peace offering. Severance, non-disparagement. A paragraph about how my role had evolved beyond the company's current needs. Beyond their needs. That was the lie. The truth was sitting right next to me, smiling politely, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. Miles Reardon, newly promoted Senior VP of Operations. My replacement, my shadow, my executioner. He didn't look at me like an enemy. He looked at me like a spreadsheet that had finally balanced. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just said, okay. And for a second, the room shifted. Because they expected noise. They expected begging, bargaining, a little humiliation to make them feel righteous. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and pushed my chair in like I was leaving a dinner party early. The HR woman Lydia blinked hard, like my calm was an insult. Miles cleared his throat. Security will escort you to collect your things. Security. Not a colleague. Not a friend. Not even my manager. Security. As if I might steal something. As if I hadn't been the one quietly saving them from themselves for 3 years. I nodded again. Sure. I walked out with my hands empty. No box. No dramatic hallway scene. Just the sound of my heels on polished concrete and the low hum of an office pretending not to watch. At my desk, the security guard stood 2 feet behind me, like a bored chaperone at prom. I opened my drawer and pulled out exactly 3 things. A small notebook with a leather cover, a silver pen, and a framed photo of my younger sister on her graduation day, smiling like the world owed her something beautiful. That's it. I left everything else behind. The company hoodie, the noise-canceling headphones, the little cactus someone had gifted me in a team-building exercise I never wanted to attend. I didn't need souvenirs. The guard walked me to the elevator. He didn't speak. I didn't either. And when the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the mirrored panel. My face was steady, but my eyes looked like someone who had finally stopped holding a bridge together with her bare hands. Down in the lobby, the receptionist wouldn't meet my gaze. Outside, the November air hit me like cold truth. I stood on the sidewalk and watched Northline's logo shimmer on the building's facade. Bright, confident, untouchable. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The humiliation, the sting, the way betrayal crawls up your throat and tries to become words. Then, I swallowed. Because words were not my weapon. Silence was. I walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop and ordered an Americano I didn't want. I sat by the window and watched people move like they still believed effort was rewarded. My phone buzzed once. A text from a number I hadn't saved, but I recognized anyway. Miles Reardon. Wishing you the best, Mara. This was purely business. Purely business. That phrase is a blanket people throw over cruelty so they don't have to feel it. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I locked my phone and took a slow sip of bitter coffee. And I smiled. Not because I was okay. Because I finally understood the game I had been playing. Northline didn't fire me like a person. They fired me like a plug. They didn't realize the thing about pulling a plug is that the room goes dark. At 9:17 a.m., they thought they had removed the problem. By 4:42 p.m., the first client call came in. By Wednesday, their biggest partner requested an emergency audit. By Friday, the compliance portal I built single-handedly started to glitch. Small things first. Annoyances. Delays. A missing report here. A misfiled document there. The kind of mistakes that don't look like sabotage, they look like neglect. And neglect is what happens when the person who cared is gone. The following Monday, I was at home, barefoot, wearing an old sweatshirt, watching an email notification roll in. Not from Northline. From a client. Subject line. Quick question about your reporting process. I didn't answer. I just watched. Another notification. Another. And then the one that made me sit up straighter. Subject line. Urgent. Discrepancy found. I didn't know yet what discrepancy, but I knew what it meant. Because the system wasn't broken. The system was honest. It had been honest the whole time. The only reason Northline looked clean was because I was the one scrubbing the fingerprints off the glass. I set my coffee down and opened my notebook. Not to plan revenge, not to plot a takedown, just to write one sentence, calm and neat, like a promise. If they want to pretend I never existed, I'll let the truth remember me for them. And that's when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway holding a slim laptop bag and wearing a Northline badge on a lanyard. Her smile was too eager. Her eyes were too nervous. She looked young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, the kind of person who still believed the company would protect her if she followed the rules. She raised her hand to knock again, then stopped herself, like she was reconsidering her whole life. I opened the door halfway. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for miles. "Hi," she said quickly. Mara Jensen? Yes. She swallowed. "My name is Quinn Harper. I'm the new compliance analyst." I almost laughed. They replaced me with someone who still said, Quinn's gaze flicked behind me into my apartment, like she expected danger. Then, she lowered her voice. "I'm not supposed to be here," she whispered. "But And Miles told me not to worry about it." The hallway light turned her face pale. "Please," she said. "Can I come in?" I held the door, silent. This was not my revenge. This was theirs. Finally arriving at my doorstep, I stepped aside and let her walk into the quiet. When people talk about power in a company like Northline, they talk about titles: senior vice president, director, head of strategy. They don't talk about the people who keep the building from collapsing, the ones who catch mistakes before they become headlines, the ones who turn chaos into routine so everyone else can look brilliant. That was me. Not famous, not celebrated, just necessary. 3 years earlier, I wasn't supposed to land at Northline. I had applied to 15 companies after my last job ended, the way jobs sometimes end for women who tell the truth. A male manager misunderstood my boundaries. An HR department couldn't confirm the pattern. A resignation letter became the cleanest exit. I took a pay cut and walked into Northline like someone walking into a storm with an umbrella made of paper. The first week, I noticed 2 things. First, Northline ran on adrenaline. Every day felt like a sprint. A new client, a new product, a new urgent initiative. They called it hustle. It was just disorganization, dressed up in confidence. Second, Northline was terrified of regulators. Not enough to behave, just enough to fear being caught. They didn't want compliance. They wanted the appearance of compliance. And that is where I came in. My job title was Operations Analyst, but what I actually did was translate leadership's chaos into something that wouldn't explode. I built reporting pipelines when teams refused to document their work. I created checklists people mocked until the day they needed them. I wrote process maps no one read until an audit loomed like a guillotine. I stayed late. I stayed quiet. I became the person people forwarded problems to, with subject lines like, "Quick question. Small issue. Can you fix this? Sorry to bother you." And I did. Because I had rent. Because my sister had student loans. Because my mother's health insurance came with gaps big enough to swallow a family. I didn't need praise. I needed stability. Northline gave me a badge and a desk and a salary that made my life less sharp at the edges. So I held the company together, one invisible stitch at a time. My manager back then was Darren Klein. He was the rare kind of corporate man who wasn't threatened by competence. Darren was older, mid-50s, with tired eyes, and a voice that always sounded like he was apologizing for being in charge. He used to come by my desk and say, "Mara, you're the only person here who makes sense." I would answer, "That's not a compliment." He'd nod. "No, it's a warning." Darren taught me something in my first year. He said, "Northline is a speedboat with a leak. They don't want a mechanic, they want louder music." "What happens when it sinks?" I asked. He gave me a look that felt like a resignation letter written in human expression. "They'll blame whoever is standing nearest to the water." I remembered that. I didn't realize I'd become the nearest person. The first time I saw Miles Reardon, he was not an SVP. He was a consultant. A temporary fix. A shiny outsider brought in by the CEO, Grant Halston, to optimize operations. Grant liked outsiders. Outsiders didn't know where the bodies were buried. Miles walked into the office, like the air had been waiting for him. Tall. Clean suit. Perfect hair. Smile calibrated to make you feel like you were lucky he noticed you. He shook hands, learned names, laughed lightly, and made every conversation feel like a small audition. When he got to my desk, he looked at my screens. Spreadsheets. Risk logs. A dashboard I had built to monitor transaction anomalies. He tilted his head. You built this? Yes. How long did it take? Longer than it should have, I said. He smiled like I'd made a joke. That's a very Mara answer. I hadn't told him my name yet. That was my first warning. Miles didn't just listen. He collected information, people, weaknesses. He stayed late sometimes, not to work, but to be seen working. He volunteered for cross-functional projects that made him look essential while others did the real labor. And slowly, he began doing something dangerous. He began taking credit for the stability he didn't create. It was subtle at first. In meetings, he'd say, "We implemented a new reporting structure," when the "we" was me. He'd present a slide and nod at my dashboard, like he'd invented it in the shower. He'd talk about building processes while I sat there, silent, because I didn't enjoy public conflict. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself my work still existed. I told myself stability was the reward. Then the CEO started listening to him more than Darren. Grant Halston loved Miles because Miles spoke in certainty. Grant didn't like questions. He liked answers that sounded like victory. And Miles gave him answers wrapped in ambition. A few months after Miles arrived, Darren called me into his office and shut the door. His hands were trembling. Not from fear, from anger that had nowhere safe to go. "Mara," he said. "I need you to hear me clearly." I sat down. "Okay." He leaned forward. "Miles is pushing to restructure operations. He wants a new org chart. He wants your role under him." I felt my chest tighten. "I already support ops." Darren's laugh had no humor. "No, Mara. He wants you controlled. He wants your access, your knowledge, your systems." I stared at him. "Why?" Darren's eyes were sad. "Because you're the only person who can prove what's real." A silence sat between us. I asked the question I didn't want answered. "Is my job safe?" Darren looked away. That was the answer. A week later, the official announcement came. Miles Reardon, Senior VP of Operations. The email was cheerful, full of corporate confetti. It said things like, "transformational leadership," and "operational excellence." It didn't say what I saw in the hallway that same day. Darren, standing at the printer, reading his own new reporting line. His shoulders drooped like a man, realizing the company had already decided his ending. That afternoon, Miles invited me to a meeting. Just the two of us. Glass conference room. Same river view. Different day. He sat across from me with a notebook open, like he was about to conduct therapy. "Mara," he said warmly, "I want you to know how valuable you are." I didn't respond. He continued, "You're the backbone of this place. Everyone tells me that." I waited. Miles smiled. "I want us to work closely. I think your skill set is underutilized." "Underutilized," I repeated. "Yes," he said, nodding like he'd just diagnosed a problem. "Too much time in the weeds, too much doing. I want you thinking bigger." My stomach turned. People like Miles say thinking bigger when they mean stop documenting things. I kept my voice calm. "What exactly do you want me to do?" He leaned back, relaxed. "I want you to transition ownership of certain systems. Risk dashboards, compliance logs, partner reporting." "Transition to who?" I asked. Miles didn't hesitate. "Quinn Harper." The name hit me like a slap from the future. So Quinn wasn't just a random new hire. She was a plan. Miles watched my face carefully, like he was reading numbers on a screen. "I haven't met Quinn," I said. "You will," he replied. "She's bright, eager, and she'll have you as a mentor." Mentor. A sweet word for a bitter job. "Why now?" I asked. Miles's smile thinned, just slightly. "Because we're scaling. And we need redundancy. We can't have critical knowledge sitting with one person." That sentence was framed like wisdom, but it was an accusation. A way of saying, you are a risk. Not because I was wrong, because I was singular. Miles tapped his pen on the notebook. Then he said the line that finally showed his teeth. And Mara, we need you aligned. Aligned. Meaning obedient. Meaning quiet. Meaning grateful. I looked at him. And for the first time, I saw what he truly was. Not a leader. A man who used the language of leadership as camouflage. I stood up. Not in defiance. Just in decision. I'll meet Quinn, I said. But I'm not transferring anything without documentation and sign-off. Miles's eyes flickered. So fast most people wouldn't notice. But I had built my life reading micro-expressions in boardrooms where people lied for a living. He smiled again. Of course. Documentation is your thing. My thing. Like it was a hobby. Not the reason they weren't already in court. As I left the conference room, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Subject: Process Transition, Mara Quinn. Attendees: Grant Halston, Miles Reardon, HR, Legal. Legal. I stopped walking. Because legal only comes to one kind of meeting. The kind where someone is about to disappear. I looked back through the glass wall. Miles was still sitting there, writing something in his notebook, smiling to himself, like he'd already won. And that's when I realized something that made the air feel heavier. Miles didn't want my work. He wanted my silence. Because if I spoke, the whole company would have to admit the truth. Northline wasn't a speedboat with a leak anymore. It was a speedboat, aiming straight at a cliff. And they had decided I would be the one blamed for the crash. Quinn Harper sat at the edge of my desk, like she was afraid the chair might collapse beneath her. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't typing. She was watching me the way people watch a storm from inside a car. Careful, silent, ready to run. Up close, she looked younger than I'd thought. Not inexperienced, just unarmored. The kind of person who still believed effort and goodness were enough. Mara, she said softly. Thank you for meeting with me. I kept my voice neutral. You're new. You need context. Quinn nodded too fast. Yes. And I want to do things the right way. The right way. That phrase always sounded innocent. Until a company decided the right way was inconvenient. I turned my monitor toward her. The dashboard I built glowed with tidy graphs and alert thresholds. This is the compliance watch list, I said. It flags transaction patterns that regulators care about. Quinn leaned in. It's beautiful. I almost smiled. A dashboard isn't supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to be honest. Here's what you need to know, I continued. Northline moves fast. Your job is to slow reality down enough that it doesn't break anything. Quinn's eyes flicked to the aisle behind me. Miles wasn't there, but he didn't have to be. He was in the way. Her shoulders stayed tight. In the way she lowered her voice when she said, Miles told me we're streamlining. Less friction. Friction. That was the word executives used when they meant accountability. Streamlining can be fine, I said. But you don't remove the brakes from a car to make it faster. Quinn swallowed. I didn't mean. I know, I said gently. You didn't mean anything. You're just repeating the language. Her cheeks flushed. I didn't blame her. Companies train people the way aquariums train fish. They learn the glass is real. They stop testing the edges. I clicked into a folder with carefully labeled subfolders. Audit trails. Partner reports. Regulator correspondence templates. Quinn's eyes widened. I didn't know all this existed, she whispered. That's the point, I replied. When systems work, leadership forgets they exist. Quinn hesitated, then asked, Why are you being nice to me? The question was raw, unexpected. I looked at her for a moment. Because you're not the person who decided to use you as a weapon, I said. Quinn blinked. Use me as. The ping of a calendar notification cut through her sentence. Both of our screens lit up. Meeting in 10 minutes. Process. Transition exec review. Attendees. Grant Halston, Miles Reardon. Legal, HR, Mara Jensen, Quinn Harper. Quinn's face drained. Oh my God, she whispered. Legal is on it. Yes, I said. That's not training. That's choreography. Quinn's hands started to tremble. I'm going to mess up, she said. I can feel it. He keeps asking me to confirm things I don't understand yet. I closed the folder and leaned back. Listen to me, I said. In that room, you don't try to impress them. You don't volunteer opinions. You don't guess. Quinn nodded, eyes glossy. If you don't know, I continued, you say. I need to validate that against the audit trail. Quinn repeated it under her breath like a prayer. I stood up. Let's go. As we walked, the office felt quieter than usual. Not because people weren't working, because people were listening. The rumor had already moved ahead of us, like smoke. Mara is being transitioned out. Mara is being replaced. Mara is in trouble. A few colleagues kept their eyes glued to their monitors, pretending not to notice. A few gave me sympathetic half smiles, the kind people give at funerals when they're afraid grief might be contagious. One person, Jenna, from partnerships, caught my gaze and mouthed 2 words. You okay? I nodded once. Because the truth was complicated. I wasn't okay. But I wasn't powerless either. In the glass conference room, the river looked the same as always. Cold, indifferent, unstoppable. Miles was already seated. Legs crossed, hands folded like he was about to host a talk show. Grant Halston stood near the window on a call, speaking in clipped, confident bursts. HR Lydia sat with a folder and a pen. Legal was represented by a man named Simon, who looked like he hadn't slept since law school. Quinn took a seat beside me, like she was seeking shelter. Miles smiled at both of us. Mara, he said brightly. Quinn. Great. Let's make this easy. Easy. That word in corporate rooms was always a threat. Grant ended his call and turned around. His eyes slid over me, without warmth, without curiosity. Like I was already less real. Okay, Grant said. Miles tells me we've got a few control gaps. Control gaps. Not errors, not fraud, not lies. Gaps. Miles leaned forward, voice smooth. We're scaling, Grant. And as we scale, we need to ensure our reporting reflects the new volume. Mara has been handling a lot of this manually. Manually. The first lie. I had built automation. I had built redundancies. I had built guardrails. But calling it manual made it sound messy. Made it sound like me. Miles continued. We ran an internal spot check. A few partner reports didn't reconcile. I stayed silent. Grant looked at me for the first time. Not like a person. Like a suspect. Mara, he said. Why didn't you catch this? There it was. The blame, already chosen, already delivered. Quinn's breath hitched beside me. I kept my voice calm. Which partner reports? Miles glanced at Simon from legal, then back to me. The Redwood account, he said. Redwood. I felt my stomach tighten. Because Redwood wasn't just any partner. Redwood was the one Grant bragged about at conferences. The jewel. The proof. The story. Miles slid a printout across the table. Numbers. Totals. A red circled variance. He tapped the circled part, like a teacher pointing at a wrong answer. We're short, he said. By a meaningful amount. Grant's jaw clenched. How meaningful? Simon from legal cleared his throat. Enough to trigger reporting obligations, depending on classification. Lydia from HR scribbled something down. I looked at the printout. Then I looked at Miles, and I understood the trap. Because the variance wasn't a variance. It was a category shift, a known anomaly type that had been documented months ago, with a regulator-safe explanation, filed in a folder that Miles only recently gained access to. It wasn't an error. It was a story, and they were trying to rewrite it as my failure. I kept my face still. I can explain this, I said. Miles smiled. Please do. The room leaned in. They didn't want clarity. They wanted a confession. I pointed to the variance line. This isn't missing money, I said. It's reclassified transactions. The reporting output changed because Redwood switched settlement methods in Q3. Grant frowned. Why wasn't that flagged? It was, I replied. In the compliance memo dated August 12. Miles' smile didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. He hadn't expected me to have a date. Dates are dangerous. Dates don't care about narratives. Simon from legal looked up. Do you have that memo? Yes, I said. It's in the audit trail folder. Miles' fingers tapped the table. Grant stared at him. I haven't seen it, Grant said. Miles lifted his hand slightly, performing innocence. If that exists, great. But the issue is we're finding multiple inconsistencies. It suggests a process breakdown. Process breakdown. Translation? Mara. I turned to Quinn. Quinn, I said calmly. Did Miles ask you to validate the audit trail on Redwood before this meeting? Quinn's eyes widened. She looked at Miles, then at me. Caught between two cliffs. Miles' tone softened, almost parental. Quinn is still onboarding. Let's not put her in the middle. Put her in the middle. That was exactly what he'd done. Quinn's hands shook. I did look, she said quietly. Miles's smile froze. Grant's eyes narrowed. And? Quinn swallowed hard. There is a memo. August 12. It explains the settlement method change and the reclassification. Silence hit the room like a slap. Lydia stopped writing. Simon's pen paused. Grant's gaze cut back to Miles. Miles recovered fast, too fast. He laughed lightly. Perfect. Great. Then. That resolves that piece. That piece. Like it was a loose thread. But for Grant, it wasn't a loose thread. It was a crack. Because if Miles had dragged everyone into a meeting with legal, over something already documented, then either he was incompetent, or he was lying. Grant walked back to the table and picked up the printout. He read it again, like reading it might change reality. Then, he set it down slowly. Miles, he said. Why is legal here if we have documentation? Miles didn't blink. He leaned forward, voice even. Because it's not just Redwood. Of course it wasn't. The trap always had a second door. Miles slid a second sheet across the table. Then a third. Different accounts. Different variances. A pattern. A story. Grant's face hardened again. This is a pattern, he said. Miles nodded. Exactly. And when there's a pattern, it usually traces back to a single point of failure. Single point of failure. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. My stomach stayed calm. Not because I wasn't afraid. Because I was seeing the shape of it. They weren't firing me for one mistake. They were creating a cloud of smoke, so thick no one could see who lit the match. I looked down at the new sheets. 2 of the variances were real. Not errors, just anomalies that required careful handling. The kind I handled quietly. Every week. The kind that could become catastrophic headlines if someone careless touched them. I looked up. Grant was staring at me again. Mara, he said. Can you explain all of these? The room waited. This was the moment they expected me to panic. To stumble. To become human in a way they could weaponize. I took a slow breath. Then I said the most dangerous thing you can say in a room built on control. I can explain them, I said evenly. But I won't do it from memory. Miles' jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. I continued. If we're treating this as a legal risk review, then we follow protocol. We validate each variance against its audit trail. We document our findings. We don't improvise. Simon from legal nodded slightly, almost grateful. Grant's eyes stayed on me. You're saying we pause? He asked. I'm saying we do it correctly, I replied. A beat. Miles jumped in quickly. Grant, with respect, we don't have time for a slow crawl. We need decisive leadership. We need to ensure we have the right person owning these controls. There it was again. Not about the variances. About ownership. About taking my hands off the steering wheel. Grant's lips pressed together. Then he looked at Quinn. Quinn, he said. Can you own this process? Quinn's eyes darted to me. To Miles. To the folder in Lydia's hands, like it was a loaded weapon. Her voice came out small. I can, but I need. Miles leaned forward, friendly tone. Knife underneath. You have Mara to support you, he said. For now. Grant nodded once. Fine. Mara, you'll transition ownership to Quinn immediately. Miles, you oversee. Legal, you monitor. My chest stayed quiet, but something inside me hardened. This was their decision. They were stripping me in public. Not firing me yet. Just making sure everyone watched me become less. Grant stood up. We'll reconvene end of week. I want clean numbers. He walked out first, already finished with us. Simon followed, muttering something into his phone. HR gathered her papers, eyes avoiding mine. Miles lingered. He waited until the room was mostly empty. Then he turned to me with that perfect smile again. See? He said softly. Easy. Quinn didn't move. She looked like she'd been hit by a wave and was still trying to breathe. Miles placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. You did fine. he told her, then looked at me. And Mara, he said, voice gentle. Let's make sure we don't have any more surprises. Surprises? That word meant, don't embarrass me again. He left the room. The door closed. And Quinn finally exhaled, like she'd been holding her lungs shut. I didn't want to say it, she whispered. But he made me. He told me if I didn't back him up, I'd look incompetent. I looked at her. You did the only honest thing, I said. Quinn shook her head, eyes wet. I think he hates me now. I paused. Then I said, no. I stepped closer and lowered my voice. He doesn't hate you. Quinn looked up at me. He's using you, I continued. And when this goes wrong, he'll try to make it your fault too. Quinn's face crumpled slightly. What do I do? She asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Quinn wasn't just a pawn. Quinn was an opening. A witness. A person who still felt guilt. And guilt, in a company like Northline, was rare. I reached into my bag and pulled out my leather notebook. I opened it to a blank page. Then I handed Quinn my silver pen. If you want to survive here, I said, you document everything. Quinn stared at the pen like it was a weapon. It is, I added quietly. Then I wrote the first line myself, neat and calm. Date. Time. Who said what? Who asked you to do what? Quinn's breathing steadied, just a little. She nodded. And somewhere in the quiet of that empty conference room, the real story began. Not the story Miles wanted. Not the story Grant would approve. The story that could be proven. The story that would burn clean through lies. And as we walked back to our desks, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A text message. Just 4 words. We need to talk. Tonight. No signature. No name. But I knew exactly who it was. Because only one person at Northline would text like that. Short. Commanding. Certain I'd obey. Miles Reardon. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I showed it to Quinn. Her eyes widened. And I smiled small, cold, controlled. Because now, I wasn't alone in the room. Now there were 2 people watching the story being written. And Miles was about to hand me more ink. Miles chose the restaurant. Of course he did. A narrow place tucked between 2 louder ones, all low light and exposed brick. The kind of spot executives loved, because it felt authentic without ever being inconvenient. He texted the address, not a question, just coordinates. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not because I was eager, because I never liked walking into a room already arranged against me. Miles was already there anyway. Seated at a corner table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, posture relaxed like this was a favor he was doing me. He stood when he saw me, smile warm enough to fool anyone watching. Mara, he said, leaning in for a half hug I didn't return. You look good. It was the first move. Flattery before pressure. I sat down and placed my bag carefully beside the chair. Why are we here? I asked. Miles laughed softly. Straight to business. I admire that. A waiter appeared, menus in hand. Miles didn't look at it. Same as last time, he said, then nodded toward me. Whatever she wants. The waiter smiled and left. Miles folded his hands. You surprised me today, he said. I tilted my head. How so? You didn't panic, he replied. Most people do. Most people aren't being framed, I said calmly. The smile slipped just for a fraction of a second. Then it came back. Framed is a strong word, he said. I prefer misaligned expectations. There it was again. Language as anesthesia. Mara, he continued, lowering his voice. I'm trying to protect you. I waited. He leaned in. Grant is angry. Legal is nervous. HR is already preparing contingencies. Contingencies. A polite word for exits. If this goes the wrong way, Miles said, it won't be gentle. I'm aware, I replied. Miles sighed. Like a man burdened by responsibility. That's why we need a clean story. A clean story. I looked him in the eyes. Meaning? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and slid a folded document across the table. I didn't touch it. Severance addendum, he said. Enhanced, generous, quiet, quiet. That was the real currency. You take responsibility for the reporting gaps, Miles continued. as a process oversight. No malice, no intent. And in return, I asked, you walk away intact, he said. No investigation, no black marks, no burned bridges. Burned bridges. As if the bridge wasn't already on fire, I finally unfolded the paper. One paragraph was highlighted. Acknowledges sole responsibility for internal reporting discrepancies and confirms no further claims or disclosures. I looked up. So I lie, I said. Miles shook his head gently. You simplify. I folded the paper again and slid it back. No, I said. Miles' jaw tightened. Mara, he said, you're being emotional. That line. Always said to women when men ran out of leverage. I'm being precise, I replied. You want me to absorb risk that doesn't belong to me. He leaned back, eyes cooling. You built the systems. Yes, I said, which means I can also prove how they were used. The waiter returned with drinks. Miles waited until he left. Then his voice dropped. You're not thinking big enough, he said. This company will survive. It always does. People don't. I took a sip of water. Is that a threat? I asked. He smiled thinly. It's advice. I set the glass down. Then here's mine, I said. Don't ask me to confess to something you orchestrated. For the first time, Miles lost his rhythm. Just slightly. Enough. You think you have leverage, he said quietly. You don't. I met his gaze. You texted me, I said. That means you're worried. Silence stretched. Miles exhaled through his nose. Quinn is unstable, he said suddenly. She's already making mistakes. There it was. The next scapegoat warming up. She's documenting everything, I said. Miles' eyes flickered. Just once. But that was all I needed. I leaned forward. You trained her to follow orders without context, I continued. And now you're afraid she'll write down the context. Miles' smile was gone now. You don't understand how this works, he said. If this escalates, you'll be collateral. No, I replied softly. I'll be evidence. The word hung between us. Heavy. Permanent. Miles stared at me like he was seeing a new equation, one that didn't resolve in his favor. The food arrived. Neither of us touched it. Mara, he said after a moment, voice low. Sign the addendum. Leave. Start fresh. This is mercy. I stood up. Slowly. No, I said. This is fear pretending to be mercy. I picked up my bag. Miles' voice hardened. If you walk out, you're choosing chaos. I looked down at him. No, I said again. I'm choosing accuracy. I turned and walked out. The bell above the door chimed once. Clear. Final. Outside, the night air felt sharp. Honest. My phone buzzed before I reached the corner. A message from Quinn. He asked me to backdate a memo. I said I needed it in writing. I stopped walking. Because backdating wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. I typed back carefully. Do not do anything without written instruction. Save everything. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then a reply. He's pressuring me. He says it's normal. Normal. That word again. I leaned against a brick wall and closed my eyes. This was no longer about my job. This was about stopping a lie before it hardened into history. Another message came in. This time from Darren Klein, my former manager. The man who had warned me. Heard what's happening. You were right. I kept copies. I opened my eyes. My heart didn't race. It steadied. Because patterns don't collapse from one point. They collapse when witnesses find each other. I typed back. Can we talk? His reply was instant. Anytime. I pushed off the wall and walked home. Not fast. Not shaken. Just deliberate. Because now I understood something Miles never would. Power doesn't come from controlling the story. It comes from knowing when the story is ready to be told. And tonight, it had started writing itself. I met Darren Klein in a place Northline would never think to look. A public library. Not the modern one with glass walls and espresso machines. An old branch on the east side where the carpet smelled like dust and patience, and no one asked questions unless you asked first. Darren sat at a long wooden table beneath a flickering lamp. He looked thinner, older, like a man who had been carrying weight without permission. When he saw me, he didn't stand. He just nodded. Mara, he said, You still walk like you're bracing for impact. I sat across from him. And you still keep receipts? A corner of his mouth lifted. I knew this day would come, he said. He slid a manila folder across the table. It was thick. Too thick. I didn't open it right away. Before I left, Darren continued, I started noticing things. Pressure from above. Requests that didn't match policy. From Miles? I asked. He shook his head. From Grant. Miles was just the delivery system. That sentence settled heavy. Grant Halston wasn't just ignorant. He was involved. Darren tapped the folder. Those are internal emails, draft reports, meeting notes, all saved off network. I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails with timestamps, highlighted phrases, margin notes in Darren's careful handwriting. I scanned the first page. My breath slowed. Because there it was. A sentence no one should ever write. We'll correct the numbers post-close. Compliance can true it up later. Post-close. After investors. After press releases. After bonuses. I looked up. This is fraud. Darren nodded. Yes. Simple. Final. When? I asked. 6 months ago, he said. And again, 3 months ago. And again, right before Miles was promoted. Patterns. Always patterns. Why didn't you report it? I asked. Darren's eyes dropped. Because I was tired. Because I had a mortgage. Because HR made it clear I'd be isolated. Isolated. The corporate version of exile. And because, he added quietly, I thought you were still there. Holding the line, I felt the weight of that. Not guilt. Responsibility. My phone buzzed on the table. Quinn. He sent it. Written. I opened the message. Attached. A screenshot. Miles' email. Short. Casual. Damning. Let's align the memo date with the decision timeline. Keep it consistent. Align the date. I closed my eyes. This was it. The document that shouldn't exist. Because people like Miles never put the knife in writing. They let others hold it. I typed back. Do nothing else. Save originals. Forward to a personal account. You are not alone. A pause. Then, I'm scared. I replied. That means you still have a conscience. Hold on to it. I looked back at Darren. They asked her to backdate, I said. His jaw tightened. Of course they did. I stacked the papers neatly. For the first time, the shape of the thing became clear. This wasn't a single lie. It was an operating model. Pressure downward. Plausible deniability upward. And a sacrificial layer in the middle. People like me. People like Quinn. Here's the question, Darren said. What do you want? I thought of my apartment. My sister. The quiet terror of starting over. And the louder terror of letting this become normal. I want the truth documented, I said. In a way they can't bury. Darren nodded slowly. There are 3 paths, he said. Internal escalation. Board-level disclosure. External reporting. Internal meant HR. HR meant delay. Delay meant documents disappearing. Board-level meant politics. External meant war. What would you do? I asked. Darren looked at me. I already chose fear once. I won't choose it again. My phone buzzed again. Quinn. HR scheduled a meeting tomorrow. Just me, Lydia, and legal. Of course they did. Separate the witness. Control the narrative. I stood up. Then we move now, I said. That night, I didn't sleep. I organized. Folders. Timelines. Cross-references. Every email lined up with a meeting. Every meeting lined up with a number. By dawn, the story was no longer emotional. It was mathematical. And math doesn't care who you charm. At 8:12 a.m., Quinn forwarded the HR invite. At 8:19, I replied with one sentence. Please include my counsel on this meeting. 8 minutes later, HR responded. Understood. They didn't ask who my counsel was. They didn't need to. Because people only say that when they're afraid of the answer. By 9:03, Miles emailed me. Subject line. We need alignment. I didn't open it. At 9:17 a.m., exactly 1 week after they fired me, I sent one email. Not to Grant. Not to Miles. To the board's compliance address. With attachments. And a subject line that told the truth without drama. Request for independent review documentation attached. I didn't CC anyone. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain myself. I just let the documents speak. At 10:41, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring. At 11:02, another call. At 11:30, a text from Grant Halston. Mara, let's talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That word again. I looked at the river from my window. The same river I'd seen from the conference room. Unmoved. I typed back one line. I've already explained. In writing. And then I waited. Because once the truth is submitted, you don't chase it. You let it arrive. The first call came at 10:41 a.m. I let it ring. Not because I was afraid to answer. Because the moment you answer, you give them timing. And timing is power. By noon, my phone looked like a confession booth. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. Voicemails that began with confidence and ended with caution. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I made breakfast. Eggs. Toast. Coffee. Simple things anchor you when everything else starts to tilt. At 12:07, Quinn texted. They moved my meeting. Now it's with external counsel. Is that bad? External counsel. That meant the board had seen my email. That meant this was no longer an HR problem. It was a liability problem. I typed back. It means you tell the truth and nothing else. If you don't know, you say you don't know. If you documented it, you say so. 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then, Miles is pacing. He hasn't looked at me once. I imagined it easily. Miles Reardon, without eye contact. A man built on mirrors, suddenly alone with glass. At 1:13 p.m., Darren forwarded me an email. From the board. Short, formal, precise. We are initiating an independent review, effective immediately. Please preserve all materials. Preserve. The word people use when they finally understand destruction is possible. I exhaled. Not relief. Recognition. This was real now. At 1:29, Miles called again. This time, from his personal number. I stared at the screen. Then I declined. Seconds later, a text. We can still resolve this quietly. Quietly. The word had lost its comfort. I typed back. I've chosen accuracy. The typing bubble appeared. Paused. Appeared again. Then vanished. No reply. At 2:04, Quinn texted again. They asked me why I didn't flag the backdating request as a violation. My jaw tightened. That was the pivot. Blame the junior. I replied carefully. Because you didn't do it. And because you escalated by documenting. That's not a violation. That's compliance. Minutes passed. Too many. Then, they said Miles claims he never asked me to backdate anything. Of course he did. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I forwarded Quinn the screenshot she had sent me the night before. The email. The sentence. Align the memo date. I added one line. Evidence doesn't argue. Her reply came fast. Thank you. At 3:17, Grant Halston emailed me again. Longer this time. Careful language. Concerned tone. He spoke about miscommunication, unfortunate optics, and the importance of alignment during growth. He suggested a call. I read it once, then archived it. At 3:42, the office gossip reached me through someone else. Jenna from Partnerships texted. Something's happening. Legal is everywhere. Miles just canceled 3 meetings. Canceled meetings. The corporate equivalent of bleeding. At 4:10, Darren called. I answered this one. They're scrambling, he said without greeting. Miles is blaming process gaps. Grant is blaming Miles. And the board? I asked. They're quiet, Darren replied. Which is the loudest thing they can do. At 4:42 p.m., exactly as I'd predicted a week ago, the first official crack appeared. An email went out to all leadership. Subject line, temporary role adjustments. Miles Reardon was stepping back from oversight, pending review. The phrasing was neutral. The meaning wasn't. At 5:06, Quinn sent one last message for the day. Miles told me to go home early. He said. I looked stressed. I smiled. Not with joy. With clarity. That's what men like Miles do when the ground moves. They remove witnesses from the frame. I typed back. Go home. Write everything down while it's fresh. I set my phone down and sat in the quiet. For the first time since 9:17 a.m., the week before, no one needed anything from me. No fixing, no smoothing, no invisible labor. Just waiting. And waiting is hard when you've been trained to hold things together. That night, I listened to one voicemail. Just one. Miles. His voice was lower now. Careful. Mara, he said. This doesn't have to end badly. You don't want to be known as difficult. Difficult. The word they use when women stop absorbing damage. I deleted the message. Then I wrote one sentence in my notebook. When the calls become softer, it means the truth has teeth. I closed the notebook. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside Northline, something had stopped. And once momentum breaks, gravity does the rest. The interview room didn't look like a trap. That was the trick. Neutral walls, neutral table, neutral faces. Two people from the independent firm sat across from me, laptops open, expressions carefully unreadable. They introduced themselves once. I didn't remember their names. Names don't matter when the questions are designed to outlive you. This is a fact-finding conversation, the woman on the left said. Not an interrogation, I nodded. Every interrogation starts that way. They didn't ask about my feelings. They didn't ask why I'd sent the email. They started with time. When did you first notice pressure to alter reporting? I answered with dates. When were you instructed to deprioritize documentation? I answered with names. Did anyone suggest post-close adjustments? I answered with quotes. Exact ones. Because truth is most dangerous when it's precise. They exchanged a glance when I mentioned Grant's email. Not shock. Confirmation. Did you ever personally alter or conceal data? The man asked. No, I said. Did you instruct anyone else to do so? No. Did you refuse to do so? Yes. That answer landed differently, because refusal is harder to defend against than ignorance. They asked about Quinn. I described her as, she was, careful, earnest, pressured. They asked about Miles. I described patterns, not personality. Patterns don't sue you for defamation. After 90 minutes, the woman closed her laptop. We may have follow-up questions, she said. I expect you will, I replied. As I stood, she added one more. If offered your role back, would you return? The question surprised me. Not because I didn't expect it. Because I already knew the answer. No, I said. She tilted her head. Why not? I paused. Because the answer mattered. Because a system that only works when one person absorbs the damage, I said, isn't a system. It's a liability. They didn't argue. They just wrote it down. Outside the building, Quinn was waiting. She looked smaller than she had a week ago. But steadier. They asked me everything, she said. 3 times, same questions. Different order. That's how they find cracks, I said. Did you contradict yourself? She shook her head. No, because I wrote everything down. I smiled. Not wide. Just enough. My turn, she said quietly. What happens now? I looked at the street. At people walking past, unaware that inside a glass tower nearby, careers were dissolving without sound. Now, I said. They try to contain it. That afternoon, containment began. An internal memo framed as reassurance, language about values, and commitment to transparency. Miles' name wasn't mentioned. Grant's signature was. By evening, the press hadn't caught it yet, but investors had. That night, Darren texted. Board is split. Grant offered to resign for stability. They're not buying it. I read the message twice. Then, put my phone down. Because once men like Grant start offering themselves as solutions, it means they've realized they're the problem. The next morning, Quinn called me. They reassigned me, she said. Temporary leave. Paid. Paid leave. Protection disguised as kindness. They told me not to talk to anyone, she added. I chose my words carefully. You don't talk to coworkers, I said. You talk to the truth, when asked. She exhaled. I don't regret it, she said. I was scared I would. That's because you didn't betray yourself, I replied. 2 days later, the announcement went public. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a press release buried under market news. Northline Capital announces leadership changes following independent review. Miles Reardon had departed the company. Effective immediately. No farewell. No gratitude. Grant Halston would remain during a transition period. The board thanked employees for their continued professionalism. I read it once, then closed the tab. Because endings in corporate life never look like justice. They look like rearranged furniture. That afternoon, I got an email from the independent firm. Thank you for your cooperation. The board has concluded its initial findings. Initial. There would be more, but my part was done. I shut my laptop and sat in the quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for something to break. My phone buzzed one last time that week. Miles. One final message. I didn't think you'd go this far. I stared at it, then typed back. I didn't think you'd put it in writing. I blocked the number, not out of anger, out of completion, because the story was no longer about him. It was about what happens when silence resigns, and accuracy stays. The day after Miles left, the building didn't collapse. That surprised people. They expect fireworks when villains exit. They expect alarms. Instead, Northline did what companies always do when a story ends badly. It cleaned the language. The logo stayed bright. The lobby stayed quiet. The espresso machine still hissed at 8:03 a.m. Only the people moved differently. A little slower. A little more careful. Like a place that had learned, too late, what wait feels like. I wasn't there to see it. I was at my kitchen table. Sunlight cutting across the wood like a line drawn on purpose. My laptop was closed. For once, nothing inside it needed me. Quinn called mid-morning. Her voice sounded steadier than I remembered. They lifted the leave, she said. They offered me a different team. New manager. That's good, I replied. They said I'm resilient, she laughed softly. I think that's corporate for inconvenient but useful. Resilient means you didn't break, I said. That's enough, she hesitated. I looked around my apartment. The quiet. The unfinished coffee. The notebook on the table. I'm done holding buildings up, I said. After we hung up, I opened the notebook one last time. Not to document. Not to prepare. Just to read. Dates. Times. Names. Evidence of a version of me who believed responsibility meant endurance. I closed it and slid it into a drawer. Not as a trophy. As a boundary. That afternoon, Darren stopped by. He looked lighter, like a man who had finally put something down. They're rewriting procedures, he said. Real ones. Board oversight. Independent audits. Good, I replied. He studied me. You could consult. They'd pay well. I shook my head. Maybe someday, I said. He nodded. He understood. Because some places don't deserve your repair. They deserve your absence. A week later, the press caught up. A short article. Careful wording. No villains named. But the subtext was clear. Northline's growth story had a footnote now. And footnotes change how everything above them is read. I didn't share it. I didn't comment. I didn't forward it to anyone with a quiet C. I made dinner instead, called my sister. Listened while she talked about nothing important. That night, I stood by my window and watched the city. So many buildings. So many people inside them, holding things together, without credit. I used to think strength meant staying quiet, staying useful. Now I knew better. Strength is knowing when to let a system feel its own weight. My phone buzzed once more. An email. Not from Northline. From a small firm I'd interviewed with weeks earlier. Quietly, just in case. Subject line. Next steps. I smiled. Not because it was a win. Because it was clean. No drama. No leverage. Just a choice. I replied, yes. Then, I turned the phone face down. The city kept moving. Northline would survive. It always does. But somewhere inside its walls, something invisible had changed. A space where silence used to live, now had a record. And as for me, I didn't burn the building down. I didn't need to. I just stepped away. And for the first time in years, the ground held itself.